Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we are talking about the nervous system's role in emotional regulation for neurodivergent students. And joining me today is Dr. Megan Beardmore. Dr. Beardmore is a licensed school psychologist with extensive experience in the assessment and treatment of autism spectrum disorder and related neurodevelopmental challenges. She currently works at Spectrum Psych Los Angeles, where she specializes in both diagnostic evaluations and therapy. What makes Dr. Beardmore's approach unique is her integrative lens. She blends evidence-based strategies like CBT with somatic and mindful-based strategies to support emotional regulation in her clients. Today, we're digging into the autonomic nervous system, how the nervous system dysfunction impacts kids, and what body-based interventions from humming, movement, and breathing exercises can do to help.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Beardmore.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, Dr. Wilson. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you. I mean, you were here a while back talking about autism in girls, and we'll link to that episode in the show notes because it was such a great conversation, and it was so informative. We got a lot of good feedback on that. And today we're continuing to talk about neurodivergent students, but this time we're focusing on somatic interventions and how they work. And so I just love the work you're doing in this space. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much of our behavior, our kids' behavior, and their emotional experience is driven by what's happening in the nervous system, even below like our conscious awareness. So I'm thrilled to have you here to talk about that.
Me too.
Maybe we can even start by talking about the nervous system, because I think from the parent perspective, the caregiver perspective, we often see emotional regulation challenges. We see tantrums, shutdowns, meltdowns, anxiety, even depression. And you've spoken about this, how hard it is to regulate emotions when our nervous systems are out of whack. So maybe we can start by talking about like what the nervous system is, particularly the autonomic nervous system, then we can go from there.
Yes, I think that would be great. So I like to have us visualize the autonomic nervous system, that I'm going to just abbreviate as our nervous system, is like a teeter-totter or a seesaw, the thing you see at the park where there's two sides and, it goes up and down based on the sort of weight distribution. So if we can visualize on one side of this teeter-totter is the rest digest system or the parasympathetic branch. I'm going to call it rest digest today. And the other side is our sympathetic nervous system. So that's our fight or flight system. So what's happening in our bodies all the time is we're trying to stay in balance. So it's absolutely perfectly normal and really adaptive that we, if we experience a threat, that we're going to get that uptick in our fight or flight response. And then when we handle that stressor, we get a little lift from our rest digest system. When we're at rest, we allow the body to digest and do those kinds of functions. So both sides of that teeter-totter are really important.
Absolutely. I love that you use teeter-totter because I thought I was the only one who knew that term because I hear seesaw, but I grew up talking about teeter-totter, and that visualization is so helpful. It is so helpful. And I mean, you've worked extensively with children on the autism spectrum, and I'd love for you to explain how autonomic or nervous system dysregulation shows up in autistic children and teens.
Yes. And I can even expand that to neurodiverse children broadly. So we're really lucky that we live in a time where we are now able to scientifically measure autonomic dysregulation or emotion dysregulation in children with autism and children with ADHD. We also see it in kids with anxiety, depression, and folks who've had trauma. So I'm actually going to dump all of those people into this because the literature, let's see how I can kind of summarize this the best I can. So most of the time we're using different biomarkers. We're using salivary cortisol to measure autonomic dysfunction. We are often, I would say most often, using heart rate variability. And I don't need to go in the details of that, but we have different biomarkers to suggest that, yes, for the autistic population, for people with ADHD, and all the other sort of diagnoses that I've just sort of lumped in there, we now have evidence that says, yes, more often than not, it is more difficult for these people to regulate their nervous system. And how that manifests is what I'm going to now call emotion dysregulation. So going back to that teeter-totter reference is that one side can get kind of stuck, right? So we have too much activation in that fight or flight system. We also sometimes see stuckness in the opposite side where there's a rest digest sort of overactivation, and that can lead to shutdown. So yeah, we see it on both sides, and now we can say we have the evidence that yes, this is affecting these populations more often than neurotypical populations.
And I think that's really helpful for caregivers and even educators who might be seeing some of these behaviors, right? They see the manifestations of that emotional dysregulation and that imbalance, and understanding that that is directly connected to things that are happening in the nervous system. And it allows you to kind of reconceptualize the reason behind the behavior, that it's not purposeful, that someone is not trying to deliberately annoy you, that it really is connected to these differences in what's happening in the brain.
Yes, yes. And I think for many professionals, parents, teachers who have really good behavior management strategies, and they're finding themselves in these situations where, like, hey, I'm using all of my training and what I know about how to manage these tantrums or meltdowns and things, and yet I'm not able to access the child and help them get back to baseline. And I'll just add in here that professionally, I come from a CBT type of cognitive behavioral therapy background, and I found in my work that doing all of these types of interventions is sometimes not enough. I have kids who can recite cognitive distortions or what we call thinking errors, and yet when it comes to actually being activated in the moment, they're not able to implement their coping skills. So that's where I go, hey, we gotta try something a little different.
Yes. And that's so interesting because, I've heard you speak before, and it makes me think about sometimes we expect kids to be able to talk their way out of dysregulation when really they need to engage or move their bodies and engage their senses first before they can access, those connections that are tied to their thought processes.
Bingo. So not to get too much into the neuropsych side of things, but I do think it's helpful that when we're dysregulated, all of us, what happens is that our problem solving center of the brain, we call this our frontal lobe, sort of shuts off. And we're like a chicken with our head cut off, where our limbic system, our emotional center of the brain, is driving the ship. So and I think all of us can relate to this, if we're upset about something and someone tells us to calm down, that doesn't work very well, right? Because we're not able to access that frontal lobe, or the problem-solving center of our brains, to make a good decision, right?
Right. And is that what is meant by the top-down versus bottom-up regulation?
A little bit. I'm glad you're throwing this in here. So again, not to bog us down too much in the science, but I think it's really interesting and helpful, is that there's a bi-directional sort of signals that between our minds and our guts or our viscera. So only 20% of the signaling from brain to body goes in that direction. So 20% of the signals, again, from brain to body, moving in that top-down direction. We have 80% of the signaling originating from the viscera up to our brain. So and a practical application of this, again, something that I think many of us can relate to is, you see something out of the corner of your eye and you're like, oh, is that a snake? And you have this reaction in your body before you consciously recognize, oh no, that's just a belt laying on the floor, right? So when I say top down versus bottom up, I'm saying somatics or body-based work is really targeting that 80% of the signaling. I'm trying to do something with your body to tell your brain to calm down, as opposed to doing something to tell your brain to tell your body to calm down. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's very helpful because it connects to something you said before, that in treatment sometimes, CBT, for example, is not enough. We know CBT is very effective and it focuses on changing thoughts in order to change behaviors. But it also speaks to the importance of, again, that bottom up, focusing on the body, movement, breath, sensation to help regulate that nervous system.
Exactly. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, logic tells me that I'm going to have a better shot if there's 80% of the signaling going from gut to brain, that, I'll just have a better shot at being able to help the child regulate, as opposed to only that 20% signaling that I'm hoping that person's frontal lobe isn't totally off yet, so that's where we land.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm thinking about, intervention. So knowing what we know about that bidirectional, relationship and knowing the impact of the bottom up, are there interventions that you recommend that you've seen be helpful for caregivers who want better strategies to help manage the emotional dysregulation in their kids?
Yes. And I could talk so much about this, and I'll do my best to kind of summarize here. When it comes to body-based interventions, or what we're calling somatics, again, that's interchangeable. The good news is there are hundreds, if not thousands, of interventions that we try. So I want us to think about coping skills broadly as like, this is what you have in your toolbox, right? So I can use this tool and maybe that works for the problem, and maybe it doesn't, so I need to go back to the toolbox. What I'm saying is that somatics has hundreds of things we can put in that toolbox. The good news also is that because there's so many, a lot of kids, for example, will resist, at least from my experience, breath work. Nobody really wants to just sit there like a frog and be in our mindful, meditative type of state doing breath work. And especially when we're activated, because, right, that fight or flight side of us says, we don't want to be sitting still. We want to yell. Like it just doesn't feel quite compatible. So that's okay. We don't have to do breath work. I can teach you some other things with our body. And again, we're going to have more success because we are directly targeting the emotional center of the brain, as opposed to the problem-solving center of the brain that has to calm down the emotional center of the brain. So think about this as like a nonstop flight, as opposed to having to pit stop it.
Right. And are there particular body-based strategies that you can speak to? Like if someone is listening right now saying, okay, breath work didn't work, and I hear there are others, are there other things that I can be doing, or I can try, or I can put in my toolbox because I don't even have it in there to begin with?
Yeah. So I think what I'll do to kind of talk about these more specifically is I want to split this into tools that we can use when we're in our fight or flight response. So when we're experiencing frustration, anxiety, panic, there's tools for that. So one of the things, and because I'm going to make one more plug for breath work, because the exhale is so important, Dr. Wilson, it's so important. So If we just take a sigh of relief, that's our body telling us that exhale is going to automatically boost the rest digest system because our exhale is directly associated with that, as opposed to the inhale being associated with the fight or flight system. So always take that sigh of relief before you do anything. I promise it'll reduce some of that initial sort of angst. Some of the other things I do when again, we're talking about fight or flight activation is I want to discharge that response. So I need to do something to get it out of my body. So I do that through movement, right? I could sit here and I could hold myself. There's different sort of containment poses we can do, but for now, I'm just going to say, put your arms around, give yourself a nice hug, and you can start rocking from side to side. And if you do this for about a minute or two, you should experience some of that, like, we're kind of toning things down. And someone might say, well, rocking, that's kind of strange or silly. But if you think about it, what would we do when we're holding a crying baby? Rock the baby, right? Or why do we find rocking chairs so soothing? Well, because that movement directly tells that fight or flight center to calm down. Our brain starts to go, oh, what's happening? Oh, we're moving. So that's a lovely exercise that I think works really, really well. Any bilateral movement is also one of the top interventions that I would say to try. So what I mean by bilateral is using both sides of the body. You can think about it like if you want to punch somebody and your right hand, left hand, I'm punching somebody. What's happening is you're using both hemispheres, and both hemispheres of your brain have to communicate. So because of that communication, now we have important brain regions that are communicating a little bit better. And so another thing I could tell you to do is to cross your arms over your chest and just start tapping back and forth, right hand, left hand. And that bilateral movement, again, tells your amygdala or that fight or flight center to disarm itself. It says everything's going to be okay. So there's a lot of different ways. If you want to go on a walk, that's bilateral movement, right? So I'm going to pause there with the fight or flight side of things. All those things are helpful for anxiety, frustration, again, that sort of thing.
Right. And that is helpful because then you have some tools. I think you just named 4 that parents can use, and they can also use them on themselves because parents can become dysregulated when their kids are struggling, right? We all know that happens as well, which often amplifies the dysregulation in the child. So these are tools that can be used by the parent and the child. And so that child who is in shutdown mode, they're in that freeze mode. What are some tools that can be used in that regard? I think that's where you're going next.
Yeah, exactly. And I do want to, because you mentioned something really important, and I don't want to forget it, is that for parents you mentioned, or the professional to also be using these, I don't want to understate the importance of that, because here I go I was like, I'm not going to talk too much about science, but mirror neurons, right? When the adult is able to regulate their body, the child, because of mirror neurons, because of the things in our brain that orient your body to another human, you will have more success because your nervous system is effectively regulating the other person's nervous system simply by you modeling it. Right. So I think in the therapy session, when I'm experiencing activation, I'm trying my best to, or I might just kind of subtle rock. And I'm hoping that might get picked up and modeled by the child.
Absolutely. I think everyone has had that experience where even just seeing someone take a breath, you can feel your own nervous system becoming regulated just by watching.
Yeah. So, but going into moving out of a freeze state, and I think maybe I should mention what I mean by that is sometimes when we're experiencing a stressor, we get that initial sort of fight or flight response. We got to do something. We got to problem solve. And if our nervous system registers that the threat is too much for us to handle, we then move into shutdown. So all of this is actually based on animal models, right? So to pivot really quickly, but I think is helpful context is to think about an animal that is being chased by a predator. And the animal might realize, hey, I can't outrun this. This is not going to end well for me. So the animal plays dead. The animal might freeze, right? So this is an adaptive response of the nervous system when we're coding that threat is too big for us to handle. So that's what's going on, where we know we have to get something done, but we can't do it, right? That's a shutdown response. That's a freeze response. So getting out of this, we can think about sort of the opposite side of the coin. When we're in fight or flight, we want to discharge. We have too much energy in our system. We want to get it out. When we're in shutdown, we want to increase energy. We want to increase sort of activation here. Again, that's to balance that teeter-totter out. So the first thing I'm going to say here is movement. Movement. I'm just a stickler for this. We can shake our bodies. We can dance. We can play. We can go on a walk. I mean, and this is not to say, there's many of us who've had, mornings where we were like, I can't even get out of bed. I can't go on a walk. I literally cannot get myself out of this position. So I'll just say, stay in bed and just start rocking. Maybe sit up on the bed, place your feet on the ground, and then get back into bed. I'm talking about really, really subtle movements to just start to generate small amounts of energy. So movement is great. Any type of grounding exercise can be really helpful. A lot of people experience a dissociation or a feeling that they're not inside their bodies when they're in a freeze state. So I could tell you to orient to the room right now. For those listening, like what do you notice? What do you see? Do you hear anything? Right? For me, I'm listening to the birds chattering out the window. I might notice the clothes on my skin. That orients me to the here and now. That can be really helpful. Another thing I'll mention is heat. I think this is maybe a less common thing to do, but heat actually increases heart rate and reduces muscle tension. So maybe you can't get out of bed, but you can grab your heating pad. We can give that a go. So those are a couple things that come to mind.
Yes. And it's in all of the things that you've said are so accessible, right? I think that's important as well. You don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to get a membership to a martial arts class, although we know martial arts is very effective. But there are things that we can, again, grab out of our toolbox in the moment. And I think that's really the beauty of the science behind a lot of these strategies.
Exactly. You don't need anything. You don't have to go buy something. I was just asked the other day, like, can I get something? I should get the stimulator for my vagus nerve. And I'm like, you don't need that. You can hum. You can sing a song and you can get that activation.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought up the vagus nerve, because I've had families, you mentioned humming, report that humming or singing together actually help to regulate kids after they've had meltdowns. What is the vagal tone, and why is it important for emotional regulation?
Yes. Look at us just knee deep in the science here. I love it.
I know. We can't help ourselves.
We can't. The vagus nerve is also known as cranial nerve 10. That is highly implicated in regulating the nervous system. So it originates in our brainstem. And if anybody wants to look up an image of the vagus nerve, it's going to blow your mind. Because you're going to see, so it originates in the brainstem and goes all the way down to the very bottom of our gut. And it innervates so much. It regulates heart rate, breathing, our pupil dilation, so much. So the idea that when we're dysregulated with regard to the vagus nerve is that the vagus nerve is sort of floppy. The picture that comes to mind is the blow up things at car dealerships. I hope you all know what I'm talking about. And it's like flopping around with the wind. Um, that's what our vagus nerve is doing when we're dysregulated. So we want to help stimulate it so it can be a little more firm or robust. So when we say we're toning the vagus nerve, we can think about it like we're lifting weights. We're helping sort of get that robustness back in the vagus nerve. There's so many things we can do here. Talk about accessibility with vagus nerve stimulation. I mean, humming is fabulous. Gargling is fabulous because, again, that vagus nerve is right behind the vocal cords, right? So that's why it's so helpful. Going out in nature, that actually boosts vagal tone, which is wild. So literally going outside, going on a walk. You can take a probiotic and that can help boost the vagus nerve. You can, I just posted a video on my Instagram the other day with using a gua sha tool and just rubbing down the side of my neck. So if you just take your two fingers and you start where your ear sort of meets your jawline and just gently sort of massage down the side of your neck.
Doing it right now. Mm-hmm.
Yes, on both sides. You might find that makes you feel like, and I guarantee you I would start yawning if I did that for too long. So I will refrain.
I'm going to be sure to put a link to your Instagram because you've got some great videos that you've put up. And I think they're really helpful because sometimes hearing it, you're like, am I doing it right? Is this what she's talking about? And I think the videos can be really helpful in guiding folks through some of these exercises. You also incorporate mindfulness into your work. Is that, I mean, obviously we know that breath is involved. It also I think it's taught as like a thinking strategy, even though you're told to not think about things or to not be worried that thoughts may enter your head and just let them go through. But how do you incorporate mindfulness into that kind of idea of body awareness and breathing?
Yes. I'm going to answer that really quickly and go back to something you said about the visual and yes, everybody can go check out that video. I want to encourage people that there really isn't a right when it comes to somatics. And in fact, what your body does naturally when you're in a stress response is actually your window into your answer, because the body, that's its job, right? Your nervous system is here to try to be in homeostasis. So if you find yourself rocking or kind of doing interesting things, maybe pacing or talking to yourself when you're upset, let it happen. Like that's what your body needs to be doing. We can perfect one of these like fancy vagus nerve things, but if you do what your body naturally does, I think that's maybe even better. So yes, mindfulness. Gosh, how do I not go on a tangent about this?
That's a whole episode in and of itself.
It totally is. I think what I will say, the why behind it is that when we orient ourselves to the right now, meaning as you're listening to this, I want to focus on the sensation of the clothing on your skin, what you hear in the background, what is your breath doing? Where do you feel the breath? What happens is, gosh, I'm about to talk about brain stuff again, but your brain shifts from that stressor essentially into here, right here. And even if we're like spilling out, we're crying our heads off, or we're yelling and we're screaming, if you just for a moment can touch down into what's happening here, if you invite it in, you might notice that, oh, for this moment, everything's okay. Because I realize that my body is the container for the dysregulation. The dysregulation can feel like it's outside of us, but really the walls of our body, it's all happening within here. And I like to tell folks, if you orient to this breath, just take one breath. We're okay for just that breath, right? No matter what's happening, be okay for one breath. And so then, of course, I'll say, all right, like, can we try one more breath? Right. So that to me is kind of the crux of mindfulness, is that when we orient back here, we might notice that, okay, we actually can handle something that feels really, really overwhelming.
And it seems like all of the strategies that you've talked about really speak to the idea of having tools that can support our nervous system health, right? It's not just one thing that we can employ. There are a number of different things we can do, whether, in response to a fight or flight response or to a freeze response, or just wanting to feel centered in anticipation of anxiety, which is often the case for so many people. So it seems that, again, there are a number of different things that we can do. And so it's not just one. And I think you said that there are different things we can do depending on what our body needs in that moment and what our child's body needs in that moment. And what can we say about supporting our nervous system health in these ways in general, particularly if you think about parents who are raising neurodivergent children with emotional regulation challenges? Are there practical first steps for the caregivers listening in terms of what can we get started on today that would be helpful?
Yes. I'll take that question and go back to modeling. We ourselves want to be the container, right? We want to be able to help the child through an act of co-regulation, right? If we can kind of stay centered. So we first have to be sort of, I'll tell folks, like we're investigating how our own body responds in these moments, right? So first get curious. And I will also say that curiousness about your body is the antithesis to trauma. It's also the antithesis to the stress response, because curiosity helps turn our frontal lobe back on. So first, get curious about what happens when you experience activation. And then, right, can you focus on an exhale? Can you maybe start swaying side to side during one of these moments just a little bit? So trying to get your own lid back on. And what's the saying, Dr. Wilson, the put your own mask on first kind of thing? I'm terrible at figures of speech, but yes.
It's an airplane metaphor. Yes.
Yes.
Put your mask on first.
Exactly. Because then you're able to help the child simply through that act of you regulating yourself. So that to me is the starting point. The other kind of next step I would say is working with a child and try to get the child to be curious about it. So this is sort of like maybe we'd call this like a motivational interviewing approach. Is what do you think? What should we do right now? I see that you're really upset. And I'm kind of throwing in a sigh there. Well, what should we do? Let's try this. Let's do some wall push-ups. Let's try to get some of this energy out. I see that you have a lot of energy in your fists. Let's try to push some of that energy in the wall and see what happens. And the child might do that with you, maybe. And if not, or if that doesn't work, then we try the next thing, right? We're instilling that curiosity because, like I said before, what happens is that we are turning back on the regions of the brain that help us be really good problem solvers. So try one thing, ask the child, well, how do you feel in your body? That's the other thing. I'm really trying to help the child understand what's happening in their body as opposed to what happens automatically when we experience activation. We do not want to be in our body. We don't, because it's overwhelming, right? So we want to help the child go, oh, I feel hot. I feel hot, or I feel hot in my hands. Okay, well, what else could we do with our hands? Let's rip up some paper and make a mess on the floor. And we're discharging that stress response. And then it's what's really happening. So curiosity, self-regulation, I'm trying my best to summarize this, and trying to get the child to really understand what happens on a visceral level, because then there's empowerment, right? If you can figure out what's happening in your body and you're able to feel some kind of relief, there's so much, like, that feels so good, right? When you're able to say, like, oh my gosh, if I can handle that, I can probably handle this other thing that gets hard for me.
And I think that question that you mentioned, how do you feel, is so important because it helps kids make the connection between the intervention, the strategy that they tried, and then how they feel, right? Wow, I'm noticing. And again, there's that curiosity that I'm not as upset as I was before, or, now I'm able to kind of think about what I did in a way that I wasn't able to before. And when they're settled and that nervous system calms down, then they can access the thinking. It's one of the reasons why we never try to, to ask kids questions when they're in the middle of a meltdown, in the middle of a tantrum, like, why are you doing this? Because they will not be able to tell you in a thoughtful way.
Totally. Nor are we able to tell them what to do, right? Just like we don't like that, so we try to have the child explore, and we're just sort of joining in that journey of their exploration of like, what did you think of it? Did that work? Because we know that if we tell them, that we're going to get that bristled, defended response.
Right. And again, the combination, there's multiple factors, multiple things that can be utilized to help address some of these emotional dysregulation issues. And some of these body-based strategies are so helpful. And some individuals also need therapy. We talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, but I think one of the wonderful things about these body-based interventions or tools is that not every family has access to therapy right away. Sometimes they might have to wait, or they may not be able to get it at all. So these small shifts, like nature walks or music or sensory tools, can start to regulate a child's baseline, stress level.
Exactly. And then there you have the empowerment again, right? I didn't need a squish ball or something to squeeze my hands. I can do that without any tools at all.
Right. Dr. Beardmore, this information has been so helpful. As always, the last conversation we had was helpful as well, but this is also helpful in a different way. And if listeners want to connect with you to learn more about treatment, about these body-based strategies, CBT, or any other interventions for addressing emotional dysregulation and other behavioral challenges, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yes. So I work at Spectrum Psych Los Angeles. So going through Spectrum Psych is probably the easiest, fastest way to connect with me. I also mentioned I am on Instagram, but be patient because I'm new here. You can reach me, message if you want to directly contact me that way. But yes, going through our clinic is probably the best way. We do offer free consults, just so we can hear a little bit more about what's going on and just kind of help guide people in the right direction.
Wonderful. And I will put links to the website and to your Instagram in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much for being here. This was such a great conversation. And you've given me tools that I can use as well. I think they're tools that everyone can use. And I think they're helpful for all of us, regardless of whether we have someone in our lives who has emotional dysregulation issues. We all can become emotionally dysregulated at any given time. We all experience stressors. And again, the ability to access tools that can help regulate our nervous system is so helpful.
Exactly.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you so much for listening. And I hope that my conversation with Dr. Beardmore, highlights how we can offer support that doesn't focus on fixing behavior, but on building connection and regulation from the inside out. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to let us know. Email us at admin@childnexus.com or send us a DM on Instagram @ChildNexusCommunity. Be sure to also check out Dr. Beardmore's Instagram page so you can see some of the strategies we discussed in today's episode. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.